right, so today, right, still in unit 1 point, what are we in, 2? We're going to look at something called humanism. So far we saw the background of the Renaissance. We saw a little bit of the politics with the city-states. So now today we're going to focus on humanism, and then tomorrow we'll do art. So here's the humanism. If you look at, we're first going to see what is humanism, the characteristics of it, like what defines it. So humanism essentially is a revival of antiquity, meaning you go back, here we are, right, in this Renaissance time period. There's been like this 1,000-year Middle Ages. So you're going to go back from, like, you're here in, let's just say, approximately 1500. You're going to jump all the way back and look at the stuff that's like 1,000 years old plus. That's antiquity, specifically of Greece and Rome. So you're going to look at their philosophy, their literature, their art, that kind of thing. That's why I have Rome and Greece on the map right there. You got your little ancient Greece guy. So that's humanism in a nutshell. It's a revival of that old kind of thinking that hadn't been around for a long time. In humanism, there's a strong belief in individualism, that you, the individual, are important, that you have potential. That's why I have this, right? You stand out from the crowd. You're your own person. There's kind of a lot of isms. There's humanism. Now there's individualism so it's kind of a bunch of words are going to be like that. In the Middle Ages, you weren't that special, really, right? Like Americans, we think we're special. Like, I'm an individual. That concept wasn't even really around for 1,000 years. That concept comes back with the Renaissance, and then it'll come back more with the Enlightenment, and then you get the America is like the epitome of individualism. But it comes from this belief that you have potential, that you have within you some sort of greatness, as opposed to, and that you can achieve it on earth. Because in the Middle Ages, it was like, Christianity teaches that you're born in sin, you are evil, you need to be saved. This idea is, no, you are good, you have potential, you could reach greatness, that kind of a little bit different. So humanism will celebrate individual genius. Think of the people we'll talk about tomorrow, like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, right? They'll celebrate individual greatness. There's almost a cult of the individual. Like, it's cult's like a religious term, but like people, individuals are so awesome and they're better, whatever. So they focus on outstanding achievements. By the way, I'm talking just men, right? For women, it was like, they're just women. But for men, it was, oh, you could be a great man. For a woman, she was just ordinary, domestic at home, nothing special. That's kind of the concept. Foreign to our American modern ears, but in their time period, it's all focused on men. They believed in something called virtue. Virtue is the quality of being a man, the idea that you can excel in the pursuits that you go after. VIR is the word part in Latin for man. So it's the idea that you have your distinctive personality, you're unafraid to be like your neighbors, you're going to be your own person, you've got a lot of confidence, you will just stretch yourself until your abilities are maximized. By the way, you know the new slogan for Alvord Unified School District? That all students will reach their unlimited potential. I don't know what the old one was. I just know this one, and it goes with this, right? Because it's the idea that you have unlimited potential and you can achieve all things. Now, behind some of that is an individual's like, I want to be famous, so I'm going to do something different than everybody else, a quest for glory. So all that's there. It's the idea that you are being as human as you can be. Humanism, right? You're being the best you can be, achieving whatever. They believe humanists would believe the key to a good life is reason and nature. They liked a man who knew what he's doing, like you're focused on something, you know what you're doing. Humanism also, then if you're going back to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, you got to go back and study those languages. So there's like this focus on individualism. Then there's also this focus on studying the ancient languages. Latin first. Latin comes from ancient Rome, and then it's going to be the ancient Greek also. They thought that because there is Latin in the Middle Ages, medieval Latin, but a humanistic Enlightenment kind of, Renaissance kind of person would think that medieval Latin, in their words, had become monkish, barbaric, scholastic, like that word from the other day. They basically thought the church had taken over Latin and infused all the Latin words with all this religious stuff, and they kind of want to go, let's go jump back over that and learn ancient Latin. So they're focusing first on studying the ancient languages. They're going to want to read everything in its original language. And after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, like we saw in 1453, Greek is going to be added into this, right? From Latin, they'll add on to the Greek because all those scholars that fled as the Byzantine Empire was falling brought a whole bunch of Greek writings with them, and they're like, we want to read this stuff. By 1500, just about all the significant Greek and Roman texts had been translated into their vernacular so that other people could read them too. But at first, it was this study on all the ancient languages. Why study all that stuff? They thought they're called the classics. Like, we want to study the classic, like classical Greece and Rome, their writings, to show us what those people thought about human nature, to try to understand what humans are. Good. They believed. There we go. They basically reject what was called the Aristotelian view of the world and the medieval scholasticism, where Thomas Aquinas had been trying to blend Christianity and old Greek thought. They're like, let's get rid of that. They actually just want to go back further and just take that Greek thought instead of blending it all in. They believed in what's called the liberal arts. Today you can still get a liberal arts education, right? Liberal arts education for them is grammar, rhetoric. Do you guys know what rhetoric is? Do you know what grammar is? Rhetoric is like persuasive speaking. Like, how does someone get up in front of some people and persuasively speak, or write it? So rhetoric, poetry, history, politics, moral philosophy, what's right and wrong. So you could still major in this kind of thing, right? I know sometimes this major is put down in college. I don't know what you want to major in. What do you want to major in? Do you know? History, right? History. Anybody? History? History? No? Surgery. You can major in surgery? Yeah. But you want to be a doctor and be a surgeon. Yeah, so science, some sort of science-y kind of thing. But liberal arts, none of this is really like science, right? So some people are like, oh, you can't make any money with a liberal arts education, but you can learn how to think with a liberal arts education. And that's what these people are into, is like, how do you think and figure out the world, blah, blah, blah. By the way, I think America does need lots of scientists and engineers and doctors, because I don't know what's happening to us. Nobody knows anything. Sometimes this is called the humanities. Liberal arts would be called, you study the humanities. That goes with the word humanism. So you can take humanities courses in college. That would be this kind of stuff. There's a part of humanism called civic humanism. Do you guys know the word civic? Yeah, besides the car, but yes, it is a car. So this isn't Honda humanism. That'd be cool. How about, have you heard the term like civic center? Yeah, a Honda Civic, the car. How about a civic center? Never heard that term? How about, I'm trying to think some other civic. In some schools, students take a civics class. Have you heard that? You're getting close. Yes, closer. Civics refers to government. So like the civic center, like Riverside Civic Center, or somewhere else Civic Center, it would be like the government center. So civic humanism is basically humanism, all this kind of liberal arts kind of thinking applied to government. And so a lot of kings, if I want somebody to help me rule, I want one of these guys who's been studying the liberal arts, the humanities, and that person would be into what's called civic humanism. How do you apply all that humanistic thinking into governing, into government in general? So history is a big part of it, right? History is part of this whole humanities, liberal arts kind of thing. And they're like, we can study history, we can see mistakes that were made in the past or things that were decided well in the past, and we can replicate them or avoid them so that we can have a better future. That's the kind of idea that we'll take this liberal arts and make governing better. That's civic humanism. Humanism's often, I didn't mean to get to this guy yet. He can be distracting. Humanism tended to be secular and lay-dominated. We've already used the word laity in here before, right? Lay-dominated means it's not the church. It's just regular, common, average, everyday people, not the leaders of the church. So it's often lay-dominated, and it's also secular means worldly. So it's kind of the opposite of religion. So it's secular and lay dominated. It doesn't mean they're not Christians. All these people in this time period are pretty much Christian. But there's this type of thinking that's kind of humanism, that's kind of straying a little bit maybe because it's more secular than the deep religious thinking that they've been doing for 1,000 years during the Middle Ages. So that's kind of the humanism. Now, if I asked you, what's humanism, right? You could sit there and go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, humanism. Or I only got 7. So, next, you get Petrarch. So let's look at some humanists, right? Some people who believe in humanism or think humanistically. This is Petrarch. Petrarch's considered the father of humanism, meaning he's one of these first guys to start talking about all this stuff. He is considered the first modern writer. His writings are no longer subordinate to religion. Middle Ages, everyone's writing religion. If you're a writer, you're writing religious topics. Now his is going to take a step away from that. It's going to be a little more secular, not be so focused on religion. He would write stuff like, he would just like, let's write about love. Let's write about nature. I think he's like the first hippie, really, right? Because he's like, let's write about, and he would write imaginary letters to Greek and Roman authors, like he'd read them, and now he's like, I'm going to write a pretend letter to Aristotle or whoever, right? Like, dear whoever, and write about love and nature and whatever. So his writings do revive an interest in all these classical writers, but instead of just always talking about the church, and how you have to have faith in the church. He doesn't write about that, right? Because he's not subordinate to religion anymore. Instead, he writes about simple personal pleasure of love. Now, to you guys, that probably doesn't even seem like that big a deal, but for them, they're straying away from kind of what they've been doing for 1,000 years, what it's like to just watch nature, to climb mountains, just to do things for the pure joy of doing things. That wasn't the concept in the Middle Ages, so it's kind of a difference here in humanism, that there maybe some happiness can be attained, just the pure joy of doing something. Then he goes on and says that an individual's emotions and feelings and pleasures are just as important as his religious faith. That's kind of edging secular, that instead of faith being the dominant idea in your life, your feelings matter, your personal pleasure, your happiness matters. So this is Petrarch. He puts together an encyclopedia of Greek and Roman mythology. Good enough. He also he's the guy who kind of labels the Middle Ages the Dark Ages that they've now come out of. And I'm sorry, this is Boccaccio. I was on the wrong person. So there's Petrarch. Then you get this next guy, Boccaccio, and Boccaccio puts together the encyclopedia of Greek and Roman mythology. What's the point? Because what's a humanist do? Goes back to antiquity. So that's what he's doing, and he's bringing the old ideas. I don't know. Do you guys study mythology in any class? In English somewhere? 7th grade. Okay, so all that stuff had kind of disappeared for 1,000 years. Maybe it was over in the Byzantine Empire, right? That's where it kind of had been, but far away from the other part of Europe. And then when those scholars fled in 1453, they brought that, and then Boccaccio's going to compile this stuff. Boccaccio's most famous work is called the Decameron. I think it was supposed to be a movie either coming out last year or this year. I haven't really looked. Have you guys heard of it at all? I'll have to look it up. But that's his most famous work, the Decameron. Deca meaning 10, right? Or 1,000, 100 here. It's a collection of 100 stories that's told by 3 men and 7 women. It's kind of set in the time period of the Black Death. They've fled Florence, and these characters, you don't need to know all the details of the book, but these characters spend 10 days in a country villa, and each day one of the characters is chosen to be the king or queen for the day, and they get to pick the theme for the story. Often, the stories aren't going to be religion, so that's another thing with this humanism. They're going to tell these stories that are just more about, the social commentary of what life is like in 14th century Italy in this time. Pick whatever kind of topic you wanted. Did not have to be religion. So there are stories about tricks that women play on men. I didn't know women did that. Do they? That's what I'm thinking, yes. So, very cunning. So watch out, guys, right? Women play tricks on you. Love stories that end happily, love stories that end tragically. So you got to pick your story, and some of them are a little bit graphic, but the whole point is they're trying to Like, what is human character? What are people doing? Can we learn something about humanity through writing and what the result of certain kinds of behavior are? Good. So it definitely shows a secular spirit, right? So in humanism, you've got humanism, you've got individualism, and you have secularism. If you want to make a little acronym in your head to kind of organize your thoughts, right? It's really, well, it's ish. Individualism, secularism, humanism, or you could do his humanism, individual, secularism, or she. But if I could find a T, never mind. So the next one, Leonardo Bruni. Bruni, humanist too. He's the first one to actually use the term humanism. He's a civic humanist. He's chancellor in Florence, serving the government. He writes a history of Florence, the history of the Florentine people, the book that I have right there. He basically says in his history book, he's saying that stuff happens as a result of human action. History happens as a result of human action, not divine action. So again, a step away from it. Doesn't mean these people aren't Christians, but it's kind of a step away from God is in control of everything. God does everything. And he's saying the stuff that happens in our history, it's because of choices and decisions that we as humans make, humanism, and it's not so much divine action on things. Next is Lorenzo Valla. Lorenzo Valla is the #1 expert on Latin, right, on that old Latin, because in humanism you've got this focus on the old languages, and he wrote something called the Elegances of the Latin Language in 1444, and then he wrote something that AP Euro seems to love to ask about, and that's this book. He writes On the False Donation of Constantine. The title's On the False Donation of Constantine, and in it he's going to expose a fraud that the Catholic Church had done. So the Catholic Church claimed that in the 4th century, when the Roman Empire is falling apart, right? Rome, I think, falls apart, and it's in the late 300s, I think, that Rome is falling apart, and that the Emperor Constantine of the Roman Empire transferred political power to the Pope, to the Church, and said, Pope, you are now kind of the ruler of these, what was now called Rome and the Papal States eventually that we looked at yesterday. You're the political ruler of that. So the reason, because also they'd just be a church, right, a religious group. But the church, so let's say you're now in the 1440s, the church is claiming that they have political power too. And their claim on political power, like, why aren't we just a church, a religious organization, but why are we also a we have political power, is because the Emperor Constantine, way back in 300 and whatever, gave the land and then the power to rule over that land to the Pope. I think the Pope was Sylvester at that point. So that's and they're like, look, there's the document that Constantine signed turning the land over to the Pope. And that was their claim. Here comes now Lorenzo Valla on the scene, and he sees this document, and he's like, this document's a fraud. The Catholic Church did not get political power because Emperor Constantine gave him. There's no way that happened. How would he know that? Because he knows ancient Latin. And he's like, when you look at the Latin that this thing is written in, that's not the Latin of the 4th century. That's Latin of some, do we speak differently than English than they spoke English in 1700? Yeah, we would, like, if you wrote something or you read something that Thomas Jefferson wrote, it would look like there's words that are different. You could tell probably when it was written. That's him with Latin. And he's like, look, this Latin is wrong. They're using words that weren't used till like 500 years later. So there's no way that this can be a true document. So that's why it's called On the False Donation of Constantine. He's exposing the fraud that the Catholic Church was using to say that they had political power. What's ironic, though, is that he's still Catholic. It's not like he lost his faith, like, oh, I'm not Catholic anymore. It's not. He still worked for the Catholic Church, even served as a secretary under one of the popes at that time period. So he exposes this fraud. Now, why would APR love this kind of question on a test? I think because it encapsulates all the humanistic thinking, right? You're going back to the original languages. You're using reason. You're trying to figure this out. It's a little bit secular. Errors in the Catholic Bible at that time period, which was called the Latin Vulgate. He's like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Despite all that, he remains Catholic and serves the church. All right, next guy, Marsilio Ficino. He is influential humanist. He starts what's called the Platonic Academy. Cosimo de' Medici is like, hey, let's bring some of these ideas up. Let's research all these old ideas. And so that starts in the 1460s. It spreads the work and philosophy of Plato through Europe, translates Ficino translates Plato's works into Latin, and good. Next guy. Pico della Mirandola. Mirandola is part of that Platonic Academy there in Florence. His most famous book is something called Oration on the Dignity of Man. An oration is like oral is speaking, like it's my big speech about the dignity of man. It is probably the most famous work on the nature of humankind coming out of the Renaissance, like what is a human. So all of this is humanism, right? So remember, that's the big topic. So he says humans are created by God. They have tremendous potential for greatness because they're created by God, and they can even become kind of one with God, have union with God if they so desire. So he's basically putting on the dignity of man is like man is super high, man is special, he's way up here. And he would say man is somewhere between animals and angels. Like angels are higher than men, animals are a little bit lower than men, but man has great dignity. If you know, the Bible says things like God or man is made, or how did it say? Adam was made in the image of God, something like that. So he's saying humankind is made in the image of God, therefore has great potential. But you could make choices that could be bad and not reach your potential. He does talk about that because he said humans have free will, which we'll talk about a little bit more in this class later. The idea that you can choose your own path. Well, you have the potential for greatness, but it doesn't mean you're going to make choices that cause you to achieve your greatness. So if you can get on the right track, you can achieve greatness. If not, you may fail. A little bit more Machiavelli. We talked about him yesterday, so I'll skip that. And then you got Castiglione. Castiglione is going to write the Book of the Courtier. So we're just kind of running through all these humanists right here. The Courtier is probably the most important work on social etiquette. A courtier, like if a king has a court and you're the person in his court. So like what's the behavior? How are you supposed to behave in this court? So that's why it's social etiquette. He specifies the qualities necessary to be a true gentleman. Like what does it mean to be a courtier? What does it mean to be a true gentleman in this time period? It includes your physical and intellectual abilities. He rejects, there's lots of crude habits at the time that he's saying we don't need these kind of crude habits like spitting on the floor, eating without utensils, wiping one's nose with one's sleeve. Do you guys do that? Anyway. He describes what he calls the ideal Renaissance man. Castiglione is easy to remember. It's a C. Castiglione wrote the Courtier, right? And then he's describing the Renaissance man. This Renaissance man is well versed in the Greek and Roman classics, meaning he knows all those books and he's read all that stuff in its original language probably. He's an accomplished warrior. He can play music. He can dance. He is confident but yet modest. Is this the kind of guy any girl would like? A Renaissance man? A man who could read you poetry in Latin and then dance with you, and then be your warrior, and then what else we got, and then play you a song, whatever. That's like the perfect man, it sounds like right there, right? I don't know. By the way, what aren't they talking about here? Renaissance women, right? They're not saying, hey, be the perfect Renaissance women. No, you're just over there, right? But the Renaissance man right here. So in the Middle Ages is when you got as a teacher, I have a master's degree. The idea of a master's degree comes from the Middle Ages, that you become an expert in one thing, a master. That's not what a Renaissance man is. A Renaissance man is almost a master in many things, right? He's achieving his potential in many things, not just one. He may be, really good at some and kind of good at some other ones. Like there might be ones that stand out more than others. Like what if he can play the piano better than anything else in his life? But that doesn't mean he can't be. He's probably a pretty good warrior, dancer, all that stuff. So I don't know. Do you desire to be a Renaissance man? Let's say human. Do you desire to be a Renaissance human being? Reach your potential in all areas? Like why not, right? Why would you limit yourself? After all, Alvord's promise is that you're going to reach your unlimited potential. So why would you limit yourself and go, oh no, I can't dance. But anyway, can you guys dance? Can you sing? Can you play musical instruments? You can? How many of you play an instrument? I'm always curious in AP Euro. Not very many? I thought like playing music and intelligence went hand in hand. No? Like your brain, like no? How about maybe the discipline of playing music? I don't know. That's a lot of practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. Uh, anyway, the good. So that's the contrast. Next one. Then you got Johann Gutenberg. There's another John spelled differently, right? We've had John, John. Jan would be Jan, like Jan Hus or John Hus. And this is John also, but it's Johann Gutenberg. I think you all know him, right? Makes one of the most important inventions in the history of the world. That's going to allow all this humanistic thinking to spread, and that's the movable type printing press. Right, because then instead of someone having to write everything, you can print this stuff and it can spread a lot faster all over the place. So that's Gutenberg. There's his Gutenberg press. So no longer, that's the whole Middle Ages was, if we want a copy of it, we got to have a scribe, some guy who's going to sit there and make a copy. How expensive is that book going to be? Expensive, right? Because someone has to sit there for hours and hours doing it. The first, actually, are you a class that had Mrs. Harris? Did you do the, like a potato block thing, or what is it? You put ink on it, and then that's what the movable type printing press was. So every year I hear that you guys, and then later, did you lay under your desk and paint the Sistine Chapel? Oh, wow. I think she retired now. So you guys are going to be one of the last classes that'll know that, but what grade was that, 7th? Yeah, okay. So, first real... The first book printed here is going to be the Bible. So you've got the first printed Bible. It's called the Gutenberg Bible. I believe you can still see it. There's a copy in California of a Gutenberg Bible, I think at the Huntington Library. You've seen it? Oh, cool. I haven't been there in a long time, so I didn't know if it's still there. So that's the Gutenberg Bible. I think that one is. I don't know for sure, actually. So what's the effects of this printing press, right? You're going to have an increase in literacy. You know what literacy is, yes? Like reading, understanding stuff. In America, well, I don't have time for that. Never mind. So, but literacy, if books are expensive, what's the point of learning how to read? Because I can't even afford to buy the book that I would read. But if the price of books comes down because you can print all more of them faster, remember we talked about how when there's more of something, the cost is going to be less. Now it might be worth becoming literate so that I can read that book. There will also be more government propaganda, though, because now the governments can produce stuff cheaply, spread it around, so you'll look at it and you'll go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, whatever they like mess with your head, propaganda. National loyalties grow because stuff starts to be written in do you remember the word from the other day that starts with a V? Vernacular. Who said it? I heard it over here. Oh, vernacular. So stuff starts to be written in English and French and Spanish or whatever, and that kind of ties you to your people because you're like, I see that instead of just everything being like, oh, it's some Latin out there. Now it's stuff written in my language. Other thing is people become silent readers. Instead of everything used to be read out loud, like because I might be the only one who's got the book and I might be the only one who reads, so I'd read out loud. But once everybody starts reading, you start to have this generation, or forever, of silent readers where people just read faster silently. So in the end, you get a spread of all the humanistic ideas, and then you're also going to get the spread of, in our next unit, when we get to Unit 2, religious ideas, because then if some guy has a new religious idea and you print that thing up and you spread it around, that's going to be the Reformation when we get to it. If that wouldn't have been there, so that's, I don't know, if, is that like, what would be, is that like Twitter today? Spreading ideas? What spreads ideas today? If you had an idea you want to boom out there, how would you spread the idea today? Some sort of social media, right? So that's like early social media. To you, it's clunky. You're like, seriously, a book? But for back then, that was huge because that's how you could get all these ideas out. All right, so that's, why don't you take it wasn't even really around for 1,000 years. That concept comes back with the Renaissance, and then it'll come back more with the Enlightenment, and then you get the America is like the epitome of individualism. But it comes from this belief that you have potential, that you have within you some sort of greatness, as opposed to, and that you can achieve it on earth. Because in the Middle Ages, it was like, Christianity teaches that you're born in sin, you are evil, you need to be saved. This idea is, no, you are good, you have potential, you could reach greatness, that kind of a little bit different. So Humanism will celebrate individual genius. Think of the people we'll talk about tomorrow, like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, right? They'll celebrate individual greatness. There's almost a cult of the individual, like be your own person. You've got a lot of confidence. You will just stretch yourself until your abilities are maximized. By the way, you know the new slogan for Alvord Unified School District? That all students will reach their unlimited potential. I don't know what the old one was. I just know this one, and it goes with this, right? Because it's the idea that you have unlimited potential and you can achieve all things. Now, behind some of that is an individual's like, I want to be famous, so I'm going to do something different than everybody else, a quest for glory. So all that's there. It's the idea that you are being as human as you can be, humanism, right? You're being the best you can be, achieving whatever. They believe the key, humanists would believe the key to a good, that's antiquity, specifically of Greece and Rome. So you're going to look at their philosophy, their literature, their art, that kind of thing. That's why I have Rome and Greece on the map right there. You got your little ancient Greece guy. So that's humanism in a nutshell. It's a revival of that old kind of thinking that hadn't been around for a long time. In humanism, there's a strong belief in individualism, that you, the individual, are important. That you have potential. That's why I have this, right? You stand out from the crowd. You're your own person. There's kind of a lot of isms. There's humanism. Now there's individualism. So it's kind of a bunch of words are going to be like that. In the Middle Ages, you weren't that special, really, right? Like Americans, we think we're special. Like, I'm an individual. That concept. All right, so today, right, still in unit 1. What are we in? 2? We're going to look at something called humanism. So far we saw the background of the Renaissance. We saw a little bit of the politics with the city-states. So now today we're going to focus on humanism, and then tomorrow we'll do art. So here's the humanism. If you look at, we're first going to see what is humanism, the characteristics of it, like what defines it. So humanism essentially is a revival of antiquity, meaning you go back, here we are, right, in this Renaissance time period. There's been like this 1,000-year Middle Ages. So you're going to go back from, like, you're here in, let's just say, approximately 1500. You're going to jump all the way back and look at the stuff that's like 1,000 years old plus. And it's cult's like a religious term, but like people, individuals are so awesome and they're better, whatever. So they focus on outstanding achievements. By the way, I'm talking just men, right? For women, it was like, they're just women. But for men, it was, oh, you could be a great man. For a woman, she was just ordinary, domestic at home, nothing special. That's kind of the concept. Foreign to our American modern ears, but in their time period, it's all focused on men. They believed in something called virtue. Virtue is the quality of being a man, the idea that you can excel in the pursuits that you go after. VIR is the word part in Latin for man. So it's the idea that you have your distinctive personality, you're unafraid to be like your neighbors, you're going to